Good morning, everyone. We'll pause for just another moment while the rest of the folks get added to the meeting. So hang in there for a second, please. All righty, looks like we've got everyone in the meeting. So good morning, everybody. I'm Julie LaRock with the South Florida Water Management District, and you have joined the regular quarterly meeting of the Everglades Technical Oversight Committee. So we're glad to have you here this morning. I think if you're on Zoom, if you can see the video, which I doubt you can, you might notice that there aren't any public attendees in the auditorium today. So for those of you who are calling in, I just wanted you to be aware of that. What I'd like to do is ask the special master and each of the representatives to please introduce yourselves so we can hear your voice. Mr. Barquette?
Good morning, everyone. This is John Barquette, Special Master appointed by the court.
Thank you so much. I'll just go down my list here. So, Lori?
Yes, good morning, Julie. You look so lonesome there. Hopefully we'll see you soon. This is Lori Miller with Loxahatchee National Wildlife Refuge.
Thanks, Dan.
Good morning, Julie. This is Dan Crawford, TAC rep for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Jacksonville District.
Look like you're chomping at the bit. So what you got? Donato, did you want to speak up again?
Good morning, Donato Ferrari, Everglades National Park.
Great, thank you. And Ed?
Good morning, Julie. This is Ed Smith, DEP TOC representative.
All right, thanks, everybody. I'd also like those of you who are in the meeting as panelists, if you would like to introduce yourself as a staff member from your agency. Do we have anybody else from DOI or the park?
From DOI, Robert Johnson.
Hey, Robert. Dilip, it looks like you unmuted. Do you want to say hello?
Hi, good morning. Dilip Shinde from Everglades.
Well, hello, this is not DOI, but this is Judy Coleman from the Department of Justice.
Hi, Judy. Thanks for introducing yourself. Who else do we have from DEP?
This is Kenny Heyman, and I see Chuck DeMonico has also joined.
Okay, thank you, Kenny. Dilip, do you want to try again to say hello?
Yeah, hi, good morning. Dilip Shinde from Everglades National Park.
Thanks, Dilip.
Hi, Julie. This is Troy Hill from the Park Service.
Hi, Troy. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Do we have anybody else from the district that just wants to pop in and say hello in case you speak later? Okay, I'm not hearing any. There are a couple other folks on the line, and we may have a couple of technical staff who are attendees in case we need to call on them during the meeting, so we can move on with that. If you're on the phone, please mute when you're not speaking and reduce the volume on your computer. If you're using your phone, then reduce the volume on your computer. If you're using your computer, you You hopefully know where the mute button is. That's something I typically have to look for. If you are on the phone and you wish to raise your hand to speak, you need to press *9 for that. And you can unmute your mic if you're on the phone by pressing *6. And let me see what else we have here. If we decide to take a vote, we will take some public comment ahead of time. I don't know if we're going to do that today. Other comments on the agenda items, other public comment, we're going to take that at the end of the meeting. If we have anybody in the audience who wants to make a public comment, we can do that as well. We usually ask you to fill out one of those comment forms just so you're aware of that. Let's see, raise hand feature. Even if you are a panelist, as Zoom calls us, it would be helpful if you could raise your hand when you get ready to speak so that we're not talking over one another. If you have technical difficulties, you can use the chat feature, but please don't use the chat feature for any other participation reason, because we don't have a way of recording that, to be honest, you guys. We don't normally engage or respond to public comments during the meeting, just to kind of keep that in mind. And then for the reps, we will try to get some agenda items for the next meeting and hopefully zero in on a date for the next meeting. And let's see, one thing I did not go do is the website. So Violetta gave me a list. So instead of reading off the webpage today, I'm going to use Violetta's list. We should have posted the agenda. And then the fourth quarter, which is what we're actually reporting on here, we've got a fourth quarter report. We have the quality assessment report and the quality assessment data. We also have a revised third quarter report to convey the final compliance results for Shark River Slough for water year 21. You'll also see data tables posted there. So we've got data tables for the refuge, Shark River Slough, Taylor Slough, and the coastal basins. And we also have read aheads, which is under the read ahead link. And that includes draft notes from our last meeting and a few items that we may or may not use. One item we have on there is an update on the process for dealing with excursions. We've used that in the past, and I don't know for sure if we're going to get to that today, you guys. We've got the presentation. So we have the fourth quarter settlement agreement report. We have the final water year 21 compliance results presentation, and also the presentation that Chelsea's going to be doing to let us all know what she's looked at so far for water year 21 for Shark River Slough. And I do want to mention our agency is going to be making some changes in how we store videos. We don't know the exact date that we're going to do that, but I'll let you all know right now that it may look a little different the next time you look for a video. And if it's been switched by the next meeting, we'll be happy to show that to everyone when we get here in the auditorium. So with that, I think I'm ready to get going if you guys are. Do we have anybody wanting to modify today's agenda? Seeing none. Next up, we have approval of the meeting notes. So you guys all received the meeting notes for January. Hopefully you've had a chance to review those. Do I have anyone for edits or wanting to make any changes or a motion to approve the notes?
Good morning, Julie. This is Dan Crawford with the Corps. I do not have any edits to the notes, and I would make a motion to approve the notes as distributed. Over.
Thank you, Dan. Donato?
This is Donato. I have no edits either. Actually can appreciate the condensed version that we're looking at now, and I have second for the motion.
Great, thank you. Anybody opposed to approving the notes from our last meeting? And seeing no one unmuting, we will call these notes approved, so thank you. All right, our next agenda item is the fourth quarter settlement agreement report. So Chelsea, you're up. This will cover the period from October through December of calendar year 21.
Okay. Good morning, Mr. Barquette, TOC reps. Thank you for having me today. We have 3 reports to go through today. Some timeframes are overlapping, so I try to be less repetitive. Okay. Just a second, let me bring up the report. Yeah. Okay, the first one is our routine quarterly reporting for the fourth quarter of 2021. It includes the 12-month tracking result for Shark River Slough and Taylor Slough and coastal basins ending in October, November, and December, and the individual months of October, November, December for the refuge. So on this summary slide, the top box is for the refuge. So the observed geometric mean TP concentration of each month were consistent below the respective long-term levels that were calculated based on those stages. And the Marsh stage remained high, and we were able to collect 14 samples in each month. So in the middle section for Shark River Slough, this is the 3 months adding down to the water year 2021. We just completed the compliance test for water year 2021 ending in September. And now this quarter, we came back to the 12-month tracking again. So the 12-month ending in December includes 9 months in water year 2021 and 3 months in water year 2022. So the 12-month flow-weighted mean TP concentration ending December was still higher than the long-term limit. For Taylor Slough and coastal basins in the bottom section, so the 12-month flow-weighted mean TP concentration has been decreasing, was about half of the long-term limit fixed at 11 parts per billion. And this slide focuses on the refuge. So here, the shaded background represents the Marsh stage on the monthly basis. And the red line is the long-term levels, the limit that we have to meet. And those blue dots represent the monthly observed geometric mean of samples collected in the marsh and need to stay below the red line. So over the past 14 months, the observed geometric mean had been consistent below the limit. And the 36-month average TP geometric mean was 6.9 parts per billion. And this slide shows the similar information, but stretching the long-term level to a 0 line. And the 36-month average TP geometric mean was 2.8 parts per billion below the limit. So we've talked about these top 3 months in our routine reporting. And with the preliminary data outlook, the positive trend continues. So the observed geometric mean TP concentration are below these long-term levels every month in the next 4 months. So move on to Shark River Slough. The 12-month flowway mean TP concentration ending in October, November, December has been increasing and remains still above the long-term limit. And the percent of samples greater than 10 parts per billion was still above the guideline of 40%. And this slide shows historic compliance status, and the last column represents the water year 2021 results, which exceeded the limit. So I'll give an in-depth analysis for water year 2021 in the following presentation on 2021. And this slide shows daily flow time series in the past 3 years. Here, we clearly see the cycles between dry seasons and the wet seasons, with the flow in varying magnitude. Extremely high flow occurred about a year ago. And since then, in the last 12 months, flow continued through the dry season and the wet season. You can also see the 2021 dry season flow were much higher than the 2 previous dry seasons. And for flow at individual structure, again, high flow passed through S12A, B, C, D about a year ago. And then the last 12 months, S12A, B had a minimum flow, and S12C and D had some flow. And this slide shows the flow discharged into the L29 canal east of S333. So S33 and S33N were consistently used. And particularly S33N has been used a lot last year because it's a newer structure. Then in the middle panel for flow pumped by S356, only flow under the red line was included in compliance calculation because it represents the flow coming from WCA3B. And this slide shows the inflow and outflow into the East L29 canal between S333 and S334. So flow under this red line was excluded from compliance calculation because it went into South State, exits through S334 around the corner. So flow above this red line is the net flow that went into Shark River Slough. And this net flow concept is that we use to calculate the 12-month flow with mean concentration. So also we see higher flow, net flow in the past water year 2021. See, in the last 12 months, almost all flows discharged in L29 canal went to the Shark River Slough. But 2020, we see all the flow passed by S333 actually exits through S334. So this slide shows the biweekly sampling events, flow and in these blue bars, and TP concentrations in cyan dots. here the flow are the net flow we just talked about. And this pair, the flow and TP concentrations, are the basis that used to calculate the 12-month flow with mean concentration. So here we see high TP spikes in 2020 and 2021, but the flows were different. So 2020 had a zero flow associated with the high TP spikes, but 2021 had a substantial flow and associated with the high TP concentrations. And this high flow, along with high TP concentrations, had a substantial weight in the annual flow mean TP concentration calculation. So we'll talk about more in the next slide. So it shows the same biweekly TP concentration, but adding a line of blue diamonds representing the 12-month fluid mean concentration ending each month. And the last diamond is 9.5 parts per billion number we're reporting for this quarter. And this slide shows WCA 3A stage, Shark River slough flow, and TP concentrations in water year 2021 and 2022. So the fourth quarter ends at this black line, so with 4-month look ahead. So actually it covers 7 months in water year 2022. So currently it's under COP operations. So when this solid blue line, 3A stage, was below this dash line, then the operation was under zone B, low stage zone, and the time trail flow formula controls releases and asks for continuous flow. So since COP operation was implemented, flow had continued through water year 2021, 2022 to the current date. And here we see the also water year 2022 started with much lower stage than 2021. So the 3A stage was about 10 feet. And then it struggled to stay in zone A. Basically, it hugs the dashed lines. And then at the end of November, the 3A stage fell into zone B. So overall stage was much lower, and S33 head of water staging now is about the same bottom of 2021. And TP concentrations remained high. You can see that only from October to February, TP concentration remained below 10 parts per billion. And we already see TP spikes in April. So move on to Taylor Slough and coastal basins. The fluid mean TP concentration has been decreasing and remained about below half of the long-term limit fixed at 11 parts per billion. And also the TP concentrations were all below 10 parts per billion for the 12-month ending in December. And this slide shows historic compliance status, and the annual flow mean TP concentration has been far below the long-term limit. For daily flows over the past 3 years, we also see high flow discharged into Taylor Slough and coastal basins about a year ago due to Tropical Storm Eta and other heavy rainfall events. And over the last 12 months, flow has continued except 1 month of gap. For this quarter, the total flow was about 100,000 acre feet with 60% pass through S332D and 30% pass through S18C. For flows at individual structure, so S18C and S332D had been consistently flowing since June. And the flow at G737 and S328 were always smaller in relative to S18C and S332D flow. But both structures, G737 and S328, remained open at the end of December. And this slide looks flows into and out of C111 detention area pumped by S332D, shown in this purple shaded area. And flow under this red line was excluded from compliance calculation because it was sent to North Detention Area by S332DX1 and didn't go into the park. And this neon green line represents flow at S328, which is surface water discharging points into Taylor Slough. And for the events flow in blue bars and TP concentrations in cyan dot, we can see that TP concentrations have been consistently below 7 parts per billion since last November. And adding a line of blue diamonds representing the 12-month fluid mean TP concentration ending in each month. And the last diamond is the 4.8 parts per billion number we're reporting for the end of, for the 12-month ending in December. And that's all I have for the fourth quarter reporting.
That's great, Chelsea. Thank you so much. Do any of the reps have comments or questions on the fourth calendar quarter? Because now we're going to go back to the third calendar quarter, but anything on this presentation for Chelsea? I see nobody hastening to unmute themselves, so thank you so much, Chelsea. We'll move on to our next presentation. So Chelsea's going to give us the final Shark River Slough results for water year 2021. So that'll be popping up here next.
So we're actually backing up 3 months from the previous presentation. So these are the results, the 12-month ending in September 2021. So this summary table was presented in the January meeting and also posted for the January meeting. Since then, we've received the final flow data at S12s and confirmed by USGS. So the middle section of this table for Shark River Slough was updated. So there's only very slight difference in those flow column, and all the rest numbers remain unchanged based on rounding to 10. And so the water year 2021 final result shows that the TP fluid mean concentration was 8.2 parts per billion, 0.6 parts per billion above the long-term limit at 7.6 parts per billion. And the percent of sampling events greater than 10 parts per billion was 50% higher than the guideline. So high TP concentration persisted from March to September. And this slide repeated the same information on the previous slide, so I'll just skip this. This slide was also presented in the last presentation. It's also repetitive. So the slide shows the daily flow time series. So early in the water year, so water year 2021 started here, October 2020. Then high flow occurred early in the water year, passed by S12A, B, C, D from the bottom, these from light shade to dark shade. Then since February, the flow continued through dry season, mainly through S12C, D, and S33 in this dark blue shade, S33N in this dark red shade, and S356. And we can see that the dry season flow in 2021 was much higher than the 2 previous seasons because of the Timium trio flow formula asked for continuous release. And this slide shows the same information, just in different manner. Again, similar information. And this slide shows flow discharged into the eastern L29 canal between S333 and S334. So again, the flow below this red line exists through S334 to South Dade and was not included in compliance calculation. And above this red line, this is the net flow discharging into Shark River Slough and used to calculate the 12-month fluid mean concentration. So this net flow concept is excluding the S334 flow. This one just shows sampling event, biweekly sampling event flow in blue bars and TP concentration in cyan dots. We already talked about the patterns. So high TP spikes in 2020 and 2021 occurred in the dry season, but 2020 had a zero flow associated with them, but 2021 had a substantial flow coupled with those high TP concentrations. And here you see the change of color from yellow bar, yellow dots to blue colors because TOC approved change from method 1 to method 1.5 in April 2020. Again, adding a line of diamond, then the last number is the 8.2 number we're reporting for water year 2021. And that's all I have for the final results for water year 2021 Shark River Slough compliance.
Thank you, Chelsea. So now that we do have the final USGS data, certainly Shark River Slough did exceed the limit by 0.6 of a part per billion. So I don't know, we'll see how we proceed here. Does anybody have any comments or questions for Chelsea on this updated third quarter information? I do see a member of the public with your hand up. We will get to you during the public comment period. And Donato, it looks like you've unmuted yourself.
Hey, Chelsea, thanks for doing back-to-back presentations. Your presentation and information seems sound and solid. And, we have begun our investigation as well into this dynamics driving these exceedances, and we're pointing our fingers similarly at the low stage, high flow deliveries during the dry season. But we do need to recognize that we expect to have these conditions pretty consistently going forward, given we've moved into COP, which is capturing, which is, the flow formula, the Timium trail flow formula is requiring us to deliver these waters because it provides the ecological benefits that are necessary, particularly during these dry seasons. We continue to work through understanding the dynamics through the research projects we're doing right now for sediment characterization and combining this information to better understand dynamics driving these peaks that we're seeing on an annual basis now. We'll be able to come back and figure out how to try to ameliorate some of these peaking conditions that we're seeing. But right now we are going to be dealing with this until we identify it. And I didn't see you actually point at the concentration comparisons between 333 and 333 North. But another thing that I'm seeing is it seems like that pool of water in front of these two structures basically receiving the same type of peaking conditions.
Excuse me, Donato, could you back up just a little bit? You started to talk about the 333 structures. We're having a little bit of trouble hearing you here.
Okay, let me speak louder. Can you hear me better now, or is it?
Yeah, thank you.
All right, sorry about that. So I'm saying the 333 and the 333 North concentrations seem to be very similar, and I don't know if you guys remember, for a while we thought we might be able to benefit by moving more flows to 333 North. But what we're seeing now is that whole pool in front of this complex seems to be responding to the same dynamics, which is these low stages and these high flows during that condition. So we're just going to need to do some work to figure out how to resolve this peaking condition, because as you point to, this seems to be a localized condition. We're not ruling out that the phosphorus are coming down the L67A. We're not ruling it out coming from the marsh, but that is what our sediment study is going to do ultimately. But right now, we can't rule out that moving to the 333 North is not the solution for ameliorating the peaks. So anyway, my whole point is I think you've done a really good job summarizing this information. And I see another presentation on here that seems to capture some of the same information. Is that going to happen too, Julie?
Yeah, we're planning on going ahead and doing that once we get done talking about this.
Okay, thanks. So I didn't have any questions. I was just giving comments, a little 2 cents. Like, we will be presenting our review of the data and our conclusions in the next quarterly meeting. We are going through our principles right now to get that presentation evaluated. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you, Donato. Ed, I see you have your hand up.
Thank you, Julie. Just to echo Donato's sentiments, Chelsea, great presentation. Thank you for it. It's a very nice presentation of the data. And just to kind of reiterate, it looks like, based off what I'm seeing, is we're seeing a similar situation that we saw with the 2019 exceedance that, you know, as Donato mentioned, that localized phenomena. And yeah, we certainly would have liked to see the S333 North structure kind of ameliorate some of these issues, but it doesn't seem to be the case. And so, you know, the studies that are ongoing, and a certain DEP certainly appreciates all the work that's being done by the other TOC representatives to kind of investigate, you know, what is the cause of the localized phenomena and potential results. So looking forward to seeing those studies continue and the cooperation between all the agencies. Thank you, Julie.
Thanks, Ed. Donato, want to add anything? I'm guessing no. Okay. Anybody else, any of the reps have any other comments or questions on this third quarter final data at this time?
Hey, Julie, good morning. This is Dan Crawford. Chelsea, again, really appreciate the very thorough presentation. Great job as always. Would echo both Ed and Donato. You know, the Corps is still working through our ongoing evaluation of the data. Also, definitely want to echo Ed's point that I think the TOC and our agencies behind us spent a great deal of time scoping the sediment characterization study and the hydrodynamic modeling study after the water year 19 exceedance event, and very much look forward to continuing work on that data, back briefs to the TOC reps, and availability of that information, hopefully later this fall, to consider as we look at paths forward and potential, whether anything can be done, because Donato's correct. The Corps adopted the combined operating plan in September of 2020, and that plan is all about providing deliveries to Everglades National Park and balancing the ecosystem benefits. So these dry season deliveries to Shark River Slough are a critical component of the restoration goals for the Everglades, and will be continuing for the foreseeable future. So definitely look forward to continuing to do our deep dive into the data, and hopefully we continue to accelerate the ongoing studies from the water year 19 exceedance and get that information available to our agencies to review at the earliest opportunity. Over. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Lori, any comments?
Just trying to unmute. Thank you, Julie. Again, Chelsea, fantastic job, as always. You always provide really good information. I know it's a lot of work. So again, thank you from the refuge for pulling this all together. And really all I can do at this point is just echo what Donato and Ed and Dan have all said. I have already kind of talked to my principal. So, she's been kind of briefed on what's going on. So we're going to wait for, I guess, some of the final analyses, and then we'll just go from there. So we're here to assist any way that the refuge can. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much. Each of you has mentioned about looking at data. I know we on our end are trying to move things along here. So we did start looking at the data on our part, and Chelsea has a presentation on that, and we'll check in with you guys after that about what you want to do for the next meeting. But there's our process that we have to go through, and we all need to be satisfied that we've looked at all the data and figured out as best we can what's going on down at that end of the system in this particular case. So if we don't have anything else, I'm going to ask Chelsea to go ahead and give her third briefing. I guess I could have built this as the Chelsea Q show today. And again, this is our attempt to kind of get a jump on things, considering workload and everything else going on. So Chelsea did take a look at everything to try to move us along in terms of the things that we need to look at under the consent decree. And I would ask Chelsea to go ahead and launch into this final briefing of the day. Thanks, Chelsea.
Thank you, Julie. This presentation presents the exceedance analysis for Shark River Slough in water year 2021 based on the hydrologic and water quality conditions. So this slide just reminds us those are the numbers that we're looking at. So water year 2021 ending in September, and the flowing mean TP concentration was 8.2 parts per billion and 0.6 parts per billion higher than the limit. So we evaluated the exceedance under these 4 conditions in this column. And the evaluation of these first 2 conditions are required by the consent decree. So whether there were data errors or there was an extraordinary natural phenomenon. If it's due to none of this, then what else we look at? So we look at the operations and upstream conditions. In the end, we identified the major drivers to compliance results. So what are data errors? When we look at data errors, we look at 2 things, flow data and water quality data. So for flow data, we check whether there's a missing flow or suspicious flow. For water quality data, we check whether it's missing samples or qualified sample. So if either of these occurred, then would they change the exceedance conclusion? Then it would be considered as data errors. So for flow data, we didn't find any missing data or suspicious flow data. For water quality data, we found 2 missing samples and 1 qualified sample. However, these occurred under low flow conditions, and it wouldn't change the 0.6 parts per billion exceedance results. So if the exceedance was like 0.1 parts per billion, and some events may move it, but for water year 2021, these small flow events wouldn't change the 0.6 parts per billion exceedance conclusion. So therefore, data error is not a factor. And the second question is, was there an extraordinary natural phenomena? So we look at the WCA 308 rainfall. So on this figure, each bar represents the monthly rainfall compared with 30-year average rainfall. So the blue bars mean rainfall surplus, and red bars means rainfall deficit. So water year 2021 had 2 extremes: high rainfall in October and November, then very low rainfall in the remaining months. Particularly from January to August, you can see the rainfall deficit runs consecutively, which means the condition was very dry. But when summed up, the total annual rainfall was 55 inches. Actually looked like a normal year, average year. So because these 2 extremes were canceled out. And this slide shows rainfall impact and operations. So heavy rainfall occurred early in the water year, which resulted in high stage shown in these red line and massive flow shown in this blue shaded area. But the impact on concentrations was actually TP concentration was very low. So these yellow dots ranged from 5 to 7 parts per billion. And 2021 contrasts to 2017, in which TOC determined as an extraordinary natural phenomenon year, in 2 things. One is the timing of the rainfall events, and second, the following TP concentration. So in water year 2017, the June rainfall fell during the transition period from dry season to wet season, and stage was low as 3.3 headwater was 8.5 feet, and which resulted in high TP concentrations. And TP concentration at S333 was 89 parts per billion. But the water year 2021 heavy rainfall occurred later in the dry season, later in the wet season, and S33 headwater was already 10 feet. And the following TP concentration was very low. So these low TP concentrations did not cause the high annual flow rate mean TP concentration. So therefore, we conclude that extraordinary natural phenomenon is not a factor for water year 2021 compliance results. What really happened was that these heavy rainfall and wet conditions was followed by a dry period. And water year 2020 also had a dry period. See, S33 headwater had the similar bottom 7 feet. But the difference was flow. So 2020 had a 0 flow, and 2021 sent a lot more flow because of the time mutual flow formula asked for continuous flow, even when stage was low. So that formula was not in 2020, but implemented in 2021. So we're seeing the same local phenomena. So when the stage was low, TP concentration spikes and was extremely high. So the conclusion was that we didn't see data error, and we didn't see extraordinary natural phenomena as factors. So what else we look at it? Was there any upstream influence? So this slide depicts the inflow sites for inflow to WCA3A. So those inflow sites are divided into western inflows and eastern inflows. So the western inflows include flow from STA56 and was forced travel to the marsh, and then mixed with flow from L28 canal, L28 interceptor canal, and Mollis through flow, then continue to travel down into the marsh. And the marsh TP concentration were very low, ranged from 5 to 7 parts per billion. And the eastern inflows, including STA flows coming from S150 or went to WCA2, then moved into WCA3A via S11s, S9 and S9A serving Western Broward, and flow from S340 in the Miami Canal. So there are 2 structures along the Miami Canal, S339 and S340. So usually they were closed. They only open if the stage in northern WC3 was very high. So all these eastern inflows combine all these inflow points. So just remind you that STA outflow comes through water conservation areas, through this eastern inflows, which have more influence on S33 and S33N, serving as the upstream. So on this table to the right, it shows the upstream and downstream TP concentrations on annual basis. So basically they are equivalent. And those years shows in red color means exceedance years. And this figure on the left side shows the time series TP concentrations. For downstream at S333, they're shown in this gold star, and S33N is shown in this black star. And in these shaded areas, when S33 headwater was below 9.2 feet. So the downstream TP concentrations in those stars were higher than the upstream, shown in blue plus signs. So this occurred in 2021, same pattern in 2022, the general pattern, and in 2019 and 2018. So the same patterns repeated. So what it tells us is that the STA and upstream put out a good water quality and they're stable. But if you look at these shaded areas, downstream TP concentrations were higher than upstream, indicating something going on downstream. And those elevated TP concentrations downstream were not associated with upstream contribution, but related to downstream dynamics associated with low stage. So therefore, upstream conditions is not a factor that caused exceedance. So what else was going on in the system? The following slides focus on understanding what might have caused the exceedance. So we look at the relationship between stage and TP concentrations, flow under low stages, and their impacts on the compliance results. Then in the end, we identified the major driver. So this slide focuses on WCA3A stage and the flow in the most recent 5 years. So we focus on WCA3A because S356 TP concentration was always low, below 7 parts per billion. And here the years with the red color means the exceedance years. Water year 2017 was an extraordinary natural phenomenon year. Here you see is S33 headwater stage. And this shaded area means stage was below 9.2 feet. And here's the flow. So this is the net flow from WC3A discharged into Shark River Slough, excluding S334 flow. So this is the net flow concept used for fluid mean concentration calculation. So here we see in these shaded area, water year 2019 had a near zero flow, 2020 had a very small flow, 2019 had a substantial flow, and 2021 had the highest flow. Here are the TP concentrations. So 2018, 2020, 21 had a similar TP spikes, but the flow were very different. So 2021 had high substantial flow and along with the high TP concentrations, and those added weight to the annual flow weighted mean TP concentration, leading to higher flow weighted mean TP concentration. So another thing I want to remind you is water year 2017, which was an extraordinary natural phenomenon year. You can see that the heavy rainfall occurred when stage was very low and TP resulted in high TP concentrations. And water year 2021, the rainfall occurred when stage was very high and just pushed the higher, and TP concentration was low. So this just reinforced that 2021, we didn't see extraordinary natural phenomena in play. So this slide shows the flow volume under these low stage conditions. So the y-axis shows the S33 headwater under 9.2 feet, and stage increase from the bottom to top. And the x-axis shows the total flow under a particular stage. So for example, at 8.6 feet, the water year 2017, 18, 2020 had a near zero flow. 2019 had about 80,000 acre feet, and 2021 had about 120,000 acre feet. And so over the past 30 years, the top 2 years that with the highest flows and the low stage were 2021 and 2019. And those were 2 exceedance years. Also, this table just show the specific numbers for flow volumes under 9.2 feet. But I just want to point out 9.2 feet is not a gold line or any standard. Because depending on the flow and long-term limit, flow under 9.5 feet could be also problematic. So this can change, but under any stage conditions, these 2 years always had the highest flow in the last 30 years. What we found is that flows under low stage conditions lead to higher flow weighted mean TP concentration. Also, more flow under low stage drains more water from WCA3A, exacerbating the low stage high TP concentration and push the flow weighted mean TP concentration even higher. Also, more flow lead to lower limit based on the Appendix C equation. So when compare flow weighted mean and the limit for compliance test, so higher flow weighted mean concentration and lower limit increase the chance of exceedance. So basically, like more flow under low stage changes the compliance balance, tilting to exceedance side. The last slide just summarizes the conclusions. So we evaluated the exceedance and concluded that data error is not a factor. Extraordinary natural phenomenon does not appear to be a factor. Upstream influence continues not to be a factor based on the comparison of upstream and downstream TP concentrations. And based on the evidence, the major driver is the localized effects. So high concentrations under low stage conditions and more flow coupled with high TP concentration during this period. So the continuing evidence shows that the major driver to the annual flow mean TP concentration is not the upstream inflow, but the downstream dynamics, because high TP concentration is associated with the low stage. And moving water out of WCA3A and the low stage increases chance of exceedance. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Chelsea. Great job. Does anybody have comments or questions on this presentation today? Mr. Barquette?
Yes, I was just wondering if you've also evaluated solutions given that at least this identification of a potential explanation. I mean, maybe there are others, and I know that from what we've heard, lots of people are evaluating the exceedance, but given what you've presented, have you also even given thought to possible solutions?
Honestly, I would suggest that the S333 working group work that's ongoing might help us land. And Ed and Donato and Dan, I think all mentioned the work that's ongoing, and a few of us actually from the district have gone down to the S33 area while the folks contracted by the park are doing their work down there. I think, Mr. Barquette, that's my own opinion, that that'll kind of help us answer enough questions to go there. But that's just me. I see Lori has her hand up.
Yeah, so Chelsea, that was a fantastic evaluation. If we could go back to slide 5 really quick.
So slide 5?
Yes, please. And it's just about the rainfall, and you may have said this, and I might have been taking notes. Can you explain again where the rainfall data came from? I know it's within 3A. Are you averaging stations, or what's the source, I guess, of the rainfall? And slide number 5.
And I'm going to slightly repeat some of your questions because we've discovered the podium here is in a dead area. So Lori, you're asking where the rainfall data is from. Is that pretty much the case here?
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Lori. So the WCO rainfall is the official district rainfall data. I think it's interpreted from multiple rainfall stations, then generate called the regional rainfall or area rainfall. So the district separate the district into 14 regions or areas. So WCA has its own regional rainfall. That's used for district operations and also showing the SFER reporting. Did this answer your question?
Yes, Chelsea, thank you.
Thanks, Lori. Donato, you have your hand up.
All right. Again, another great presentation, Chelsea. Thank you. Can I go to slide 8 real quick? So I see the definition of what the eastern inflow is. I'm not really understanding what the 12, 11, 11, and 12 mean for the 333 over 333 north. Can you repeat what that represents one more time in that table?
So you're asking for us to repeat
Is this
what
an
the
average
table
of those
is on the
individual
right, yeah?
stations? Or... Say it again, Julie, I'm sorry.
You're asking about the S333, S33N and what that represents, correct?
Yeah, it has one number for 2 structures. What does that mean?
And of course, one of those structures would not have been in operation in 2018.
I have
2021.
Numbers under the column of S333 and S333N.
Okay. You're talking about the last column here, right?
Yes.
Those are the fluid mean TP concentration combining S33 and S33N for each water year. So obviously S33N didn't discharge it till I think it's October 2020. So it's only included in 2021. So basically these numbers were for S33 annual composited fluid mean TP concentration.
Okay, thank you. And then can you go back to the last slide? Okay, so I definitely appreciate the summary and the evaluation. And I agree that we are concluding that we're looking at a localized event. I am not at the point where I can conclude that it's not coming from upstream, either from the L67A or the Marshed. And as the special master pointed out, with respect to trying to figure out where we're going next with solutions, we still need to finish our evaluation of the sediment characterization study so we can, number one, distinguish these sources that are coming to the structure, and then conclude on how to proceed forward. So when I say I haven't concluded that the upstream are not providing it, we have the concern that some of this is being fleshed out, then being replenished over the year. So we're trying to evaluate that right now. So again, we haven't concluded that there's no upstream influence on this, but we do recognize that the low stages are driving the resuspension of these sediments and contributing to the increase in phosphorus right now. So more to come on that. And as Julie pointed out, we will be working through the 333 working group to ultimately bring that information to the table for advancement. Over.
Okay, Donato, thank you so much. Any other comments from the reps at this time?
Hey, Julie, this is Lori with the Refuge. I know we've talked a lot about the S333 working group. When is going to be the right time for the group to maybe come and report out so that everyone can kind of get caught up on, what's going on, what's being looked at, maybe some preliminary information? At some point, are we going to entertain the working group at the TOC?
As long as you don't ask me to dance as part of that entertainment, sure. Yeah, I do think we will. And I'm actually wondering, based on a couple of comments from Donato here, so maybe Donato or Dilip, you could let us know when you think on your end you might have some information to provide us. And I'm also wondering, based on the comments you just made, Donato, if not going to be prepared necessarily to deal with water year 21 exceedance until you're able to assimilate and look through some of the data you have. So maybe you could give us a quick update so we can figure out when we'll get that on the agenda here.
So I'll give Dilip the floor to talk about the 333 project. But the second point you raised about will we be able to deal with it for water year 21, my understanding is we won't be getting our data from this project that Dilip is running until the end of this year. So it's going to be outside of that window, and then we still have to evaluate it and then make recommendations based on those data. We're looking at early next year before we're ready to try to figure out how to utilize the information we're collecting and ultimately make conclusions on how to advance dealing with the problems that we're facing at the 333 structure. Dilip, can you give a brief update on where we are? Over.
Yes. So our investigations are going on at S333. We're collecting water samples, which will continue till the end of June. A lot of sediment samples and water samples are being collected. And then the laboratory analysis will continue for quite some time. We expect it to kind of wrap up by the end of this year, and then synthesizing the data, interpretation and reporting probably will take another 2-3 months.
Okay, I think I heard quote unquote early next year. So, and I do understand that it takes quite a bit of time to actually collect the data and get it analyzed and then take a look at it. So that would be the work you guys are doing. I think we have Madahel on the meeting. Let me go back over to this other list. But Madahel, you might need to raise your hand or we can unmute you if you guys have any kind of an update on where we are with the modeling. So Devon, can you unmute him, please?
Hello, yeah, can you hear me? It's Madahel.
Yeah, we sure can, thanks.
Great. Yeah, so basically what we are doing is a hydrodynamic study, and obviously we've been coordinating with the Park Services on their sediment study. Where we are right now is we have finalized the statement of work, finalized all the scenario we're going to be looking at with this hydrodynamic study. And we also have recently completed a survey that we needed to do to extend basically the data that we have to drive the model. The survey needed to be extended so we can actually match how far the sediment study is going locally just upstream of S333 and S33N. So the survey has been completed. We're just processing that data from our survey group. Once that data gets processed, that will be fed to the hydrodynamic model so we can start actually making the simulation. And the intent of the hydrodynamic model is to really look at locally what's happening not just in terms of flow, but also the velocity, meaning how fast the water is moving, particularly close to the bed of the canal system itself and in the marsh. The intent there is to help us understand the hydrodynamic of the system itself locally, trying to see if we have actually erosive velocity, meaning velocity that will be picking up sediment locally that may be contributing to some of this TP spike. Obviously, we're going to have to coordinate very closely with the sediment study. But big picture, we are on track. We are making good progress, and we're looking at, again, towards the end of this year to have some result to share as far as the hydrodynamic study is concerned. The study itself, it's a 6 to 9 month study starting from this month, basically, after this survey has been completed. That's where we are. I don't know if anybody has any question for me. Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot. So Lori, hopefully that gets to your question, because I think the answer is we all want to hear from the team, but it sounds like they may not be able to fully finish their work and assimilate results until late this year and early next year.
Yes, it does. Thank you, Julie.
Okay, any other comments or questions for Chelsea for today? Dan from US EPA, I see you have your hand up. We'll let you ask a question or make a comment. Maybe Devon has to unmute you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we sure can. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Julie. I have a question about Chelsea's last presentation, her last slide, if I may.
Sure, she's going to run up to the podium and put it up for you.
And echo what everybody else has said. Chelsea, great presentations. You packed a lot of information in there, and it's extremely well presented. I have a question about the same statement Donato had on the last slide. Yeah, the upstream influence question mark continues not to be a factor. I'm trying to figure out how to interpret what is meant by that. This presentation talked about water year 2021, but there was a lot of information about other years. So is this meant to infer that upstream STA concentrations are not a factor with phosphorus concentrations and inflows to Shark Slough? I assume it's not intended to be read that broadly. So I just wonder if you could clarify what is meant by the statement, or continues not in particular.
Well, I think I can help Chelsea a little bit here. You know, for water year 2019, the TOC agreed the exceedance was due to localized factors. And it seems to be similar again for water year 21 in that we don't have high TP values coming in from the STA discharge structures in terms of coming down the canal like may have happened, 30 years ago or something.
Well, yeah, then I'm curious, what is meant by high when you say high TP?
Well, the data coming down from the upstream structures during these certain times periods was actually had lower concentrations than what was at the S333 and going into Shark River Slough. I'll see if we can get the right slide up for you there.
Okay. Yeah, here's the slide 8. So if you look at As I explained here, these eastern inflows, ST outflows come to water conservation area as eastern inflows. And those east inflows had more influence to S33 and S33N. So basically they serve as the upstream. If you compare the upstream and downstream TP concentrations, they are basically equivalent. But if you look at these shaded area, when S33 headwater was below 9.2 feet, the downstream TP concentrations, these are weekly grab sample at S33 and S33N, were actually higher than the upstream. And this pattern is generally consistent in these years.
Yeah, and thank you for that. I think I follow all that. I guess I'm still curious about the statement. Is this presentation meant to suggest in a broader sense that STA outflow concentrations appear to have no influence on what's observed at Shark Slough?
Yes.
Okay.
Because
Yeah,
of these, okay, sorry.
No. Well, from what I've been hearing, I think over the last several years, I've never heard that statement been made so clearly. And that's a big statement, but has a lot of implications.
Well, and I think Donato implied he wants to look at that some more as well, Dan, so.
Yeah, because I mean, if you connect the dots, I think what's being suggested is go up to restoration strategies, look at the concentrations coming out of the STAs. We're not quite there yet, but this presentation could suggest it's irrelevant, if I'm following this. Or somebody tell me I'm misinterpreting it.
I think you may be misinterpreting. I think over time, those of us that have been involved are seeing improvements. And yes, restoration strategies continues on its way. I was going to say merry way, but and this body here did talk to restoration strategies some years ago as being a solution at Shark River Slough. I think it's just getting closer, Dan, but that's me. Ed, you had your hand up for a second there. Did you want to make any comments?
I was just going to state what you said, that, yeah, restoration strategies is continuing to improve, and we're seeing that. I think the issue is the driver behind the exceedance has been identified as the localized effect. I think that's just my understanding, and that was the understanding back in 2019 that was passed along by the principals to the TOC members.
Thanks, Ed. Any other comments or questions here on Chelsea's presentation before we move forward and go into public comment? We do have a member of the public with his hand up, so we'll get to you shortly. Okay, I was going to ask you guys if you had any plans to do more analyses, and I think I heard yes. So I will suggest that we will continue this conversation at our next meeting. And then Troy, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you very much. I have a question for Chelsea. Thanks, Chelsea, for all these presentations. Really excellent analysis, creative graphics. I love the figure showing the S333 stages and relating them to the total flow through the structure. Very novel way of looking at those data sets. I do have a couple questions about, I think it was the slide relating to upstream sources, either 5 or 8 perhaps. My question is basically, well, 2 questions. First, the table focused on flow-weighted mean concentrations and a direct comparison of those in the respective water years. And I'm curious why it seemed, whether you looked at total loads of phosphorus as well, a comparison of flow-weighted mean concentrations kind of hides, or isn't maybe the most pertinent variable, considering how much phosphorus is moving into and out of the system. And then secondly, I just didn't see, I wondered why you were focused on the eastern flow paths, which I'm not sure if S8 and G404 were incorporated into your calculations. So those are my two questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, so Chelsea, 2 questions. Troy asks about whether or not we looked at TP loads, and honestly, you might have hit on one of my pet peeves, Troy, but the consent decree has us looking at flow-weighted mean concentrations, and so that would be another analysis to be done, I'm sure. And your other question had to do with the eastern structures, and maybe you might need to add a little bit here. So Chelsea's got the S11s, S150, S9, S9A, and S340, and you mentioned a couple others. Are they related to the western parts of the STAs?
Yeah, I guess they would be referred to as Western. Right. Okay. So in this map, they are shown up there. So the S8 and the G404 feed in kind of the Western portions, the Miami Canal, and then the Western portions of Conservation Area 3A. And so I guess I'm curious, Chelsea, if those played a role, or if you were focused, why you were focused on the Eastern flow path in particular.
Could you repeat the question?
The question is on the previous slide, the table only pertained to flow-weighted mean concentrations from the eastern inflows.
Yes.
And I was curious about how the western inflows looked, and whether you also examined those and why you opted not to include those in the table.
Here we focus on the eastern inflows because it has more influence to the downstream southeast portion. So that's the reason we focus on eastern inflows. So western inflows travel through the marsh, and it didn't have direct influence to those southeastern portion.
I don't know if you caught that, Troy. I'm starting to intuit some things folks may be wanting to look at.
Yeah, I understood that. Thank you for the explanation, Chelsea.
Stuart Van Horn, you have your hand up.
Thanks, Julie. Can you hear me?
Yes, we sure can.
Okay, so actually that was a great question that Troy posed, and maybe it deserves a little bit more explanation and context also, because it's important to understand, what the intent of restoration is, that we get better water quality coming out of the EAA, along with, the other ancillary efforts that are being done with SERP. And when you think of it from the perspective that we're attempting to improve the concentration levels that are moving into Water Conservation Area 3A from the upstream sources, was how does that water get delivered? And you've got a western portion and an eastern portion. And one of the underlying main tenets of the consent decree is to deliver marsh-like, much better TP water quality to Shark River Slough. So in those cases, when you have water flowing across Water Conservation Area 3A, and that's a reason why Chelsea had that one map in there showing the directional arrows, is that the western flowways, when water levels are high and there is a lot of water moving through the marsh, by the time it gets down to the southern end of Water Conservation Area 3A and it's going to enter into the canals that would then distribute to Shark River Slough, the concentrations in the southern end of the marsh are at 3, 4, 5 parts per billion. And yes, there is more effort and more work that needs to be done in that northwestern area and the delivery of from STA 5-6. But in general, as that water is coming off the marsh, it's already delivering at the southern end the quality of water that, you know, I would submit is at the levels that were being expected to be delivered off of the marsh in the southern end. So again, not to confuse that there is a difference in the northern part of Water Conservation Area 3A, the northwestern part, as opposed to the south part. So that's why it's important to keep that in mind when there is an eastern flowway, which is going to be more of a direct contributor, where you're not getting marsh flow, you're having sources of water that are coming from STA 3-4, which we know in the last 6+ years, those concentrations have been below the Q-Bell at 11, 12 parts per billion. We're still waiting for the final results for this year. But you look at STA2, and when that water is transferred through the S11s, mixed in with Water Conservation Area 2A, those concentrations are very low, and S9 is staying fairly low. So, you know, when you're trying to do an apples to apples comparison and understand the hydrology and the gradients of when water is flowing through the marsh versus when it's flowing through the canal, you could include the western areas, but it's not really apples to apples when you know that the water getting down to the very southern end is already at marsh-like water quality that we expect. So you have to look at where the influences might be the most significant. So that's why it's split up this way and the analysis is done that way. But I think Julie had already mentioned that it's always open to other types of analysis that can be done. And on your comment about loads, you know, Julie had mentioned that we look at things from a concentration perspective, just like when the STAs, the Q-Bell is based on a flow-weighted mean concentration. The test for Shark River Slough is based on a flow-weighted mean concentration. We know that we're trying to send more water south. You send more water south, you are going to have a higher load, but it's coming in, you know, at 11, 12 parts per billion, and the goal down at the south end is, you know, a long term of 8. So from a load perspective, you're always, you know, that's a different way in how you evaluate it. But overall, you know, the way it is being evaluated right now, it has merit, and if there are other ideas or suggestions on how to be able to evaluate it, you know, those are certainly welcome. Over.
Thanks, Stuart. Troy, anything else? Donato, I see your hand up.
Thanks, Stuart, for the excellent, elaborate explanation and discussion. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, our sentiment, I follow Troy's sentiment. I appreciate the follow-up, Stuart. I do have a little pushback on it, and I have a question about it. We have recently evaluated some of the concentrations on the western side of Conservation Area 3A and coming out of the western basins, and then connecting that down to the lower part of L28. Looking at concentrations at that S344 structure Chelsea has on the screen, the 3,4, 3A, and B, and then S12A, we tend to see substantially higher concentrations than what we see over in the marsh. So I'm wondering, have you guys done an actual evaluation of concentrations over here with respect to transport down this western basin side, or the western side of the park, Conservation Area 3A, to support the statements that you were making earlier, Stuart? Over.
Thanks. That almost sounds like a question for Stuart. I'm a little, well, we'll let Stuart respond here for a second.
Okay, Donato, thanks for that question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I do.
Okay. Yeah, that it is an interesting phenomenon that's going on over at the S12A location, and there's different lines of evidence that we can look at. The structure of the vegetation over in that area actually there's a lot of cypress swamps and cypress domes that are upstream of S12A. So there's actually the marsh starts a little farther to the east of S12A. So, is it coming straight off the marsh, or is it coming out of the cypress domes? Is it coming down that canal from farther upstream? How far upstream do you look? So those are all good questions. We know that the water quality that's coming out of the western feeder is higher than what is desired. The marsh stations that the district historically had worked with Big Cypress Preserve to monitor in that gap area between Big Cypress Preserve and the water conservation area, those concentrations are lower, and we know that we've got that huge vegetation halo that's up just downstream of the where the L28 interceptor, I guess, terminates in water conservation area 3A. So it's hard to say exactly where that source of water is coming from. Is it local, where you're having a local phenomenon that under low stages that the TP concentrations are, we use the term loosely cooking, but you have a good point, and we don't know because there's a lot of things that are going on in that area. It's hard to try and figure out exactly what's going on at that structure. But your point is taken that maybe that is something we need to evaluate in the future. Over.
Thanks, Stuart. Any other conversation about this? Dan, I see you have unmuted yourself.
Yeah, hey, Julie. I guess I just want to add that I do think it's as part of the evaluation, it will be important to look at dryouts in portions of northeastern conservation area 3A that are associated with those flow paths that Chelsea indicated, because I think the presumption is that when you look at flow weighted means that water is always flowing. But in the instance of 2021, where we had some extensive periods of low water conditions in the northern part of the system, those dryouts can contribute to mobilization of legacy phosphorus load that may not be directly attributable to the flows that are actually coming in from the S11s or S150 during that particular year. And so there may be some potential contributions from some of that legacy load in the system that's not directly related to the flow coming into the system right now. And I think that is something that should be looked at as part of the continued evaluation. Over.
Okay, thanks, Dan. That almost sounds like you're volunteering to do that for us. See, he's not going to unmute himself, is he? Oh, sorry.
I'm not volunteering to do that, but I do think that it's important to consider that effect as part of the hydrology when we're making overly broad statements. Over.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else from the reps or your staff? All right, so I think what I'm hearing here is we want to look at some more data. I say we. I know, Donato, you mentioned you're working on something you want to show us at the next meeting. I think it's not clear if there are others on the TOC who are intending to do the same. Are you guys looking at some stuff for next meeting?
Hey, Julie, this is Dan from the Corps. I know we'll definitely bring some coordinated perspectives from our principal to the next meeting, but I won't commit to a detailed analysis or a presentation. Over.
Okay, that's great, Dan. Thank you. You know, Dan Scheit from US EPA, I know you spoke up earlier. I don't know if you have any insights from all the remap work you guys have been doing. So if that's something that the federal side of the House would like to bring to the table, we would certainly be interested in hearing about that. All right, so I think we're done with the presentations. It looks like we're done with discussion. We've heard a few things that folks think need to be looked at, so we can look forward hopefully to hearing from people at the next meeting. What I'd like to do now is go to public comment. We've got a couple people with their hands up, so we'll get to you shortly. The individual who had her hand up earlier looks to have departed, so I'm sorry we didn't get her comments. Our first public comment comes from Paul Julian. If you could let us know if you're commenting as a member of the public or representing some other agency or group. Paul?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we sure can.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, Paul Julian, SCCF and Conservancy of Southwest Florida. Thanks for the public comment period and great information as usual shared during this meeting regarding conditions. You know, I guess my comment is kind of maybe broad brush, and maybe there's a question buried in there, who knows. But it comes back to the fact that we've had a lot of exceedances actually in the past, 5 to 8 years relative to the period of time in which we've had the long-term limit put in place. And it's interesting. And we're all digging into the whys, of course. But something that has dawned on me is I don't want to say that the long-term limit is, too strict or not strict enough or sensitive is actually a better word. And it could be, when the long-term limit was established, the variability in flow weight and mean concentrations during the baseline period are maybe different than what we're experiencing today. And that could be a potential driver. And of course, asking the question of, okay, then why are that variability occurring? And it could also boil down to something's different in the system, and that we've have restoration going on. We have different operational plans, all that kind of stuff kind of can contribute to the conditions that we experience and observe at the Shark River slough inflows, for instance. And who knows, maybe it's a combination of all these things. But I think it's something to be acknowledged that we've had numerous exceedances, albeit a couple natural phenomena in the past couple of years, and it seems to be more frequent than in the past. And I guess another question or comment is, regarding that 9.2 limit or stage limit, or not limit, sorry, value. We have a general idea of understanding that when stages drop below 9.2, that total phosphorus concentrations at the S333 and 333N increase. And I think back in the day when several of us are working on this, I vaguely remember that depending on how you put the data together, that 9.2 number can go as far down as in the upper 8s. So there's some variability around that 9.2 metric, and I think there's some validity in understanding that and attempting to understand how that relates to the hydrodynamics of the system and how we move water places and the resulting flow weight and mean concentrations to the park. And I guess one last point, loads were brought up, and I know it's a sour subject for the TOC, but that information along with marsh concentrations are tracked very intensely and reported out in the chapter 3A of the South Florida Environmental Report. And so there's a whole volume of information, including historic time series analysis, that can maybe provide some insight or information into kind of those dynamics. So again, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And I look forward to stuff in the future.
Great, thank you, Paul. Ernie Barnett, you have your hand up.
Hi, Julie. This is Ernie Barnett with the Florida Land Council. First of all, compliment staff for an excellent presentation. I did want to point out, and I echo what Dr. Julian just mentioned. I couldn't agree more. I think there is some major changes and operational protocols that took place in the last 10, 15 years. The significance of that statistically is Appendix A was developed with a certain set of operational protocols and water deliveries. And I would be surprised and shocked if those numbers were still being consistently met throughout the entire range of the compliance methodology, because it's a compliance methodology based on a series of operational decisions that no longer take place. Water has been dramatically redistributed across the S12 structures and the S333. They no longer remotely align up with the underlying technical assumptions that were in place when Appendix A was developed. And then I think you have a very flawed compliance methodology. And due to that, combined with the statements about the wide range of variability on the lower end, a 0.6 part per billion excursion, I wouldn't call it an exceedance. It's just your formula doesn't accurately predict based on the current operational protocols. You've gone through many iterations, test runs through mod water deliveries. You've changed flows through ERTP. Now you've dramatically changed flows through COP, and water simply does not flow in the volumes and concentrations and distributions that were in place at the time the Outstanding Florida Water designation was established, and those flows into the park are no longer remotely consistent with what they were. I would also point to is if you look at the ambient water conditions in both the park and 3A and 3B and 2A and 2B and Loxahatchee, the ambient water conditions in the Everglades has dramatically improved over time since that compliance methodology was developed. And it makes no sense at all that you would have this rapid increased amount of excursions if there wasn't something else at play. And I strongly believe it's that you have a methodology that no longer accurately predicts performance, and compliance should not be based upon a flawed methodology protocols. Thank you.
Thank you, Ernie. We have any other members of the public who would like to make a comment? Please raise your hand. We'll give you another moment or two to figure out how to raise your hand. If you're on the phone, that's a *9. All right, I am not seeing any other hands raised, so I do want to thank the two of you for your comments. For the TFC reps, we need to take care of a couple of things. First of all, we need to select a date for our next meeting. I know we have 2 dates listed on the agenda, but we've realized that one of them is not going to work. So I would first of all ask if there's any chance that you guys want to meet on July 19th. Ed?
The 19th works for me. Donato.
Hey, Julie, this is Ed. I am not available on the 19th.
Okay, so would it be acceptable to everyone if we look for some alternate dates and send them to you by email? Or in the meantime, do you want to look at November and December?
I'm sorry, Julie. Are you saying the August date that you have here was one of the 2 dates that was not going to work?
August 9th is not going to end up working out. much as I would love to celebrate my birthday here with you all, that is a big conflict for other activities here at the district right now.
Gotcha.
Sorry to say that. Ed, do you have your hand up still or again? I'm not sure.
I was just going to say both the November dates and the or December dates work for me. But yeah, as far as scheduling another time, if you want to do it via email, I think that's fine.
Okay, thank you.
And this is,
Go ahead, Lori.
I was just going to say, this is Lori with the Refuge. All of the dates that we have listed on the agenda work for me, except the July 19th. Sorry about that. But I'd also like to maybe also consider when the park may be prepared to provide their presentation. Anyway, just thought we might consider that also.
I think that's a really good comment based on what I heard earlier today. Donato, you're unmuted. What do you got to say about our next meeting?
Yeah, I had already said that the July meeting was available for me, but they canceled that one. So if you want to do it by email, I'm fine with that. We're ready to give the presentation. Like I said, I just have to go through my principal, and I think we should be doing that next week.
All right, so we will look for some alternate dates. We will email those to Mr. Barquette and the reps and see if we can't possibly zero in on a date. And for those of you who are attending from the public and everything, we will get the date out on the TOC webpage as soon as we settle on it. And we'll get it on the public calendar because obviously we're not letting you know today when that meeting will take place. So hopefully that'll be all right with everyone. So in addition to our normal quarterly reporting at the next meeting, it sounds like Donato will have a presentation and possibly Dan. So once we settle on a meeting date, we will ask you guys for your agenda items so that we can get the meeting rolling. And we don't have our normal note taker here, but I didn't necessarily write down any other special action items, so I don't think we have any at the moment. All right, if we don't have anything else, I think that concludes our meeting for today. So thank you for participating. For those of you who are here listening in from the public, we really appreciate you being here as well. And it looks like we get to have some more healthy discussion at our next meeting. So thank you all so much.
Very well. Thank you. Take care.